I'm back again to talk about American domestic politics, and this time I'm going to go back to the topic of the Maine Senate race. Okay. I want to remind people, and I know a lot of people are discouraged and set back right now about the scandals coming out of Maine with the Senate race, and I was hopeful too. I really thought Graham Plattner was a pretty good candidate. I was impressed with the way he connected with people, the way he talked to people, the way he raised money and got the grassroots excited. Because I tell people that people are hungry for change. And I will remind you, a big part of the electorate that supported Graham Plattner were not traditional leftists on Twitter. So I know the media is going to support this, paint this as a DSA recruited him. DSA never endorsed Graham Plattner. Let's get the record clear on that. They recommended him. They never endorsed him, though. It wasn't the far left that propelled Graham Plattner. Basically, the field of candidates running were so weak, and a lot of the Democratic candidate officials would not step up to run. And Chuck Schumer deliberately cleared the field so he can get his own picked candidate to run for the seat, which was Janet Mills, the governor of Maine, knowing she really didn't have a shot in heck. You saw what a weak candidate she was. Plus, she's almost 80 years old. And that's going to matter to voters. Voters want to see newer, younger faces. They just do. And, to be fair, she was a two-term governor, and she was fairly popular in her own right, but she was not popular enough to run for the U.S. Senate. She was almost 80 years old. The voters were aware of that. They were ready for change. And I'll be honest, it was a non-starter. If she ran against Susan Collins, I think Susan Collins would have got reelected. Just because she really didn't stand out to people that well. I mean, plus she's older than Susan Collins. Voters are going to take that into account. Let's just be real here. She was not that great of a candidate. I saw her campaign for May Senate. She didn't really want to run. The establishment deliberately recruited her. Okay. Because this is what the establishment does. They want a seat warmer for their agenda. Okay. And, I'm not really shook by the fact that DCCC come out and said they're going to pull funding from the Senate race because of Graham Plattner. If Graham Plattner doesn't resign, which by all means, I'm not surprised they would do that anyway, because they don't want a progressive to win. They never did. They would find any reason they can to not fund that race because he's not the kind of Democrat they wanted to see get elected, because he's not going to fall in line the way they want him to. But here's the thing. Not to say I don't think he should drop. I think he should absolutely drop out because of the scandals unfolding right now with him. In fact, he's been blatantly dishonest with a lot of us, and that is problematic. You know, um, and again, other people can run. It's not impossible. It's not over. We don't concede the reality that you can't defeat Susan Collins, because you certainly can, especially this election cycle. So keep that in mind. But um, Chuck Schumer deliberately kept that field clear so he can get his chosen candidate the nomination to run for that seat. Okay. And he picked the most convenient name he can pick out of a hat, the sitting governor of Maine, which I guess in old times that would have made sense for her to run for Senate, just like you see with Roy Cooper in North Carolina. But that's a very different situation. Roy Cooper's legitimately popular in North Carolina and has crossover appeal. Janet Mills is not the same thing. Janet Mills appealed to mostly traditional liberals and a few independents, but she wasn't uniquely popular in Maine. Okay. So, that's just reality. So the thing is, Chuck Schumer deliberately kept that field clear on purpose. So there were grassroots groups in Maine that tried to find somebody who was a pillar of the community, because they do this all throughout the country. They do it here in Nevada too. Just not a lot of people that pop up. And they found a guy who was well liked in the community, and it happened to be Graham Plattner. And he was kind of the people's choice pick, and he ran. He caught wind and fire. He raised a lot of money. He got a lot of attention because of his style of politics and his campaigning, and that's how he got in. And he had the energy to his back. And no other candidate excited anybody like that. So that's just the reality. Now, obviously, he wasn't vetted. We know that now. They hurried up and pushed somebody. And again, Schumer kept the field clear. I'm going to say this again on purpose because it wasn't really about Graham Plattner. Because let's be honest, if a credible candidate ran, he wouldn't have done as good as he did. I'm just going to be honest with people. Okay? A lot of the candidates didn't run on purpose because of the leadership of the Democratic Party. And I want people to keep that in mind. Because we could have seen a competitive, vibrant primary on the Democratic ticket in Maine if more candidates were not deterred from stepping up and running for that seat. Okay? And no, Janet Mills will not be the replacement. So if any of you floating that in your mind, just get that out of your head right now. It's not going to be Janet Mills. Okay? Unless they plan on losing the Senate race, because it's not going to happen. She's not going to get voters to turn out in the same numbers. All right. But, you know, there's a couple names floating in the hat that sound promising that could take that leap. They're filing paperwork right now. But again, I want you to keep in mind, this part was doing of the Democratic establishment, not just the left. And remember, don't blame. It's not fair to blame the left for this, because I want to remind people, it's fair to criticize the vetting, the process they did to prop up Plattner. I agree. The way they did it was flawed, and I'm not disagreeing with that. But the establishment does this too. They cover for candidates. You know, again, there's a sitting congressman in Texas, Henry Cuellar, who got in trouble for taking money from Qatar and doing shady dealings. Okay. Democratic establishment defended him all the way to the end. All right. You got, was it Bob Mendez, who finally resigned from the Senate in New Jersey, who was caught up in a bunch of scandals? The Democratic establishment for decades protected his seat. Okay. I just want to remind people all this. The establishment does this a lot too. Then you had Bill Clinton and his issues with women. The Democratic establishment defended him all the way to the end, along with several other politicians. And then the Republicans, of course, with Donald Trump. And then for a while it was Matt Gaetz, and eventually they threw him under the bus when it became too much, only because he called out their corruption. And then it was another one, Madison Hawthorne, who they threw under the bus because he admitted the dirty things these people were doing behind the American people's back, as far as, you know, sex parties and stuff like that. You know, so I mean, they only throw people under the bus when they call out their hypocrisy. I just want you to keep that in mind. It's not because they have moral clarity. And don't let these pundits in the media convince you otherwise. It's BS. They don't have any moral clarity. They only attack people they don't like. And that's just fact. But I want you to still be objective and see things for what they are too. So the reality is, the stuff that came out, it's real. Unfortunately, it's the truth. And it's just the reality we're facing right now as a country. And as a grassroots left, it's fact. You can't deny the allegations. They're real. It's unfortunate, but that's where we're at. But it was never about Graham Plattner himself. It was about the movement. Just remember that. And somebody else can take the mantle. It's not too late. It's not over. And I just want people to understand that. So that's all I want to say in this video. And the fact is, we just all got to hold each other accountable and be honest with ourselves. The fault goes in all directions. You know, it's never one entity or in one group alone. I just want you to be mindful of that. But anyways, y'all, you have a great night, great morning. See y'all later. Love y'all. Goodbye.